All right, our next question comes from Charlie Savage, which is a really good name.
Yeah. Wow, it
Sounds
is.
like a character in a Tarantino
I think
film.
you should go by Chuck Savage.
Chuck Savage. Chuck Sav. He says, my friends and I are starting a retro video games podcast in November called the Flashback Arcade Podcast for our website, middleofnowheregaming.com. It's a free plug for you. However, we've been debating about what constitutes a game to be retro. We've had arguments from the Super Nintendo Genesis era up to PS2, Xbox, GameCube generation. What do you guys think makes a game retro, and how much time has to pass for one to be considered retro?
I like the 10-year threshold because that's about a generation of gamers there. You get two to three console cycles overlapping in that period of time, depending on which part of video game history you're talking about. I think if you're talking 10 years ago, you're talking about
That would include PS2, Xbox, GameCube.
Absolutely, because I think that somebody who's 20 years old is
include Xbox
tremendously
360,
different than somebody who's 10 years
PS3.
old experiencing these games, and that's...
I think you mean two console generations.
Yeah,
Because
I
10's
meant
not
two.
gonna work.
Yeah,
You're right.
10's not going to work.
Yeah, but I like 10 back.
So 20 years and two console generations.
I'd say anything 2006 or before, or 5 or before right now, roughly would be retro.
I really think PS1, Nintendo 64 is the cutoff at this point.
At this point, yeah.
I don't know. I don't think
Yeah, so
Xbox,
like-
PS2 would count.
Let's perform an experiment. Does Knights of the Old Republic feel like a retro game to you?
It does to me. Yeah, absolutely. There's a
So
lot of
here's the thing you have to consider with starting a new podcast, though, is that we are old people.
Yeah.
And you want to appeal to an audience, the same audience we want to appeal to, by talking about retro games maybe that are more relevant to them, the games they played grew up playing. And those would include, I would say for sure, PS2 era games. I would think Grand Theft Auto 3, fair game. Go for that.
I've heard people in interviews here at IGN be like, I love the new games, but I also love the old school games like God of War 2.
Yeah. No,
like,
but
what?
That's a long time. Like,
But it's a long time, yeah.
We're also
let's
totally
say-
accepting of that, and we love celebrating those retro games because for us, those were maybe at the beginning of our careers, but they're still a long time ago.
Yeah, and you also
We
do
enjoyed
want
them
to
too.
you do want to hire people that have younger sensibilities sometimes than us old farts who are just like, oh, let's make another Clue Clue.
If you were 9 years old when Wii Sports came out, you're 18 now. You're old
Yeah.
enough to be nostalgic about it. I mean, that's
That's true. That's
So
half your
in,
life.
in
ago.
producing content, I think definitely you would want to make a retro show that maybe incorporates more than what the oldest games are. That you have a bigger audience.
Yeah. But do dip back into
Pro
that
tip.
deep past as well, so that you can contextualize. I mean, that's where the old video game history
That's what's
is really
important.
powerful. It provides context.
If you're talking about GTA 3, go back and talk about the earliest open world games. You
Yep.
can talk about
Yeah.
the roots of GTA and violence in games and stuff like that. That's what makes those topics interesting in a retro gaming discussion. You can't just talk about how great it was at the time. You have to contextualize it with
So-
the history of games, and I think that's what makes things really interesting.
So what do we land on?
what we
15
do.
years?
It's,
Yeah,
it's
that's
a little
good.
gray.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Why do we call older games retro games, but older movies classic movies? They're not like retro movies.
I love classic games. I think that's a good term, but
You know,
Well, we also called older bad movies older movies.
I think
Like
that things
it's like bad.
that's a good
Okay, like
point.
Suburban Commando,
Yeah.
with starring Hulk Hogan.
That's
It's
not
a
a
terrible film,
We-
but no one's
we-
ever been like, "What a classic!"
So the concept of retro is a little bit tied to the same kind of idea where it's a couple decades past. So for us, retro, like if you say like retro style, it's going to be 90s, 80s, and not really 70s anymore. But if you said retro in the 90s, it's probably going to be 70s, late 60s.
Right.
I think that's what retro is always kind of tied to older clothing and older styles. And for games, like they kind of started in an era where people started saying the word retro.
Yeah, and I don't think Retronauts heard either. I mean, the fact is that was a really popular show for a few. It still is popular, but when it first launched, it had a pretty large viewership and listenership at 1UP, and I think that probably helped propagate the term in the gaming subculture.
Who's the guy that did the song in the 90s where Eddie Vedder sang and the chorus was, the kids of today should defend themselves against the 70s?
Was it Temple of the Dog?
No. Do you guys not remember that song?
I do remember that song.
Was
I
it
remember
Neil
who
Young?
sang it.
It was like, Eddie Vedder was doing guest vocals on that song.
Right.
I have
And the
no
chorus
idea.
just repeated that over and over again. Man.
Sounds like a lonely island.
I'm not going to look it up. I want one of the viewers or listeners to let me know. I'm going to wait for you. Counting on you guys.